Hey everybody, welcome to Investing in Cannabis. I'm your host, Brandon David. As always, great IC news on tap this week. We have Roger Obando, formerly the co-founder and CTO of Baker. So really interesting story there. But he's more recently written a book about minorities and business in the cannabis industry. Fascinating stuff, great conversation. There's this narrative that minorities and women have a better fighting chance in the cannabis industry. Is that true? We're going to discuss, we're going to talk about it as well as some other great topics, black market, the normal hit list, as you know. It's a great episode, guys, it really is. Before we jump into the episode, I want to talk a little bit more about our newest sponsor, Bespoke Financial, bespokefinancial.com. Are you currently raising money? Has your valuation been cut in half from the last round? Don't raise a down round. Consider some debt. Debt is a working, living part of most businesses. The cannabis industry should be no different. If you're in this cannabis cash crunch, if the dispensary won't pay you, MedMen won't pay you, issue an AR invoice, an accounts receivable invoice. Bespoke Financial will lend directly against that. Guys, if you need this might be the time to call. This is the week to talk to Judson. Shout out Judson. Shout out Bespoke Financial, bespokefinancial.com. All right, let's get into the episode with Roger. IC News. I learned a ton. You're going to learn a ton. Tune in, listen up, get acquainted.
Roger, so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
We're here in Venice. Anytime somebody comes to my apartment to the set, it warms my heart. I think you're best known, just from perusing your LinkedIn, as the former CTO of Baker.
That's right. Co-founder and CTO of Baker.
Co-founder and CTO.
That's right.
But you've had a number of dope jobs.
I've been around the block.
Yeah.
I'm older than I look, which is the first thing I'll say when I get in front of a group of people. I'm turning 42 next month. And I've been doing the professional nerdery since I was, 20 or so.
I love that. Yeah. Define that. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I came out of school right when .com was a thing, like right when it became a thing. Before
1999?
2000 was when I graduated.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Y2K?
That's right. Y2K was
We're
all
all
the rage.
fucked.
Everyone was going, the world was ending, right?
Uh-huh.
Everyone's bank accounts were going to zero out the next day, that sort of thing. But, that's actually...
See, I was stoked because I didn't have a bank account.
There you go. The funny thing about it was, like, before that time, if you studied computer science, you were generally going to go work somewhere like Microsoft or Oracle or something like that, right? And none of that seemed really fun to me. And so a friend of mine taught me how to build web pages when I was in high school. And I was like, now this is going to be cool.
Just like HTML stuff,
HTML
CSS,
stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like super easy.
Even I can do that.
Right. I mean, most people can do that now.
No.
Well, a lot of people can do that. But I realized that I really wanted to do that. Also, as a kid, I always loved art. I loved to draw. And so I realized that with the web, there was this graphic design aspect to it as well, where you can kind of use both sides of your brain. And so, I got to school. I went to Duke, and they didn't have like a web program.
No way.
No, it was just like
this
computer
is
science.
Duke, what, 1996?
96.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was just kind of this. It was this new thing. And Duke, I mean, for as good of a school as it is, it can be pretty conservative and a little bit
and bougie. Was it bougie then?
It was a little bougie then.
So I know you talk very openly about being a minority and sort of what that means. How was that experience entering Duke? It's this very bougie sort of good old boy network, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have that conception about it, which is not completely wrong. But the nice thing about going to Public High School USA in Jersey, we were just talking about, right? I grew up in Hackensack, New Jersey. I was the first kid in 4 years to go to Duke from my high school. Mm-hmm. And that kid was like a quarterback, right? So he went to go play football on the then terrible Duke football team, because Duke didn't have a good football team until about, let's call it 6 years ago.
Still not that good.
Still not that good, right? But, better than it was.
Better than it was.
Yeah. And so I didn't know anyone at the school, which means that I didn't have like a little community to go immerse myself in. Jersey fairly well. Rutgers. Everyone basically goes to Rutgers.
Mm-hmm. How ridiculous of a state do you have to be to not call it New Jersey State?
Right.
Like every other state, they're like proud, right? They're like Arizona State.
Right.
Even though Arizona State is like, whatever. They're like Arizona State.
Right.
Rutgers?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Well, don't they call
what's
it
a Rutgers?
the State University of New Jersey now? Like, it's a subtitle?
I don't know.
Or something like that?
I don't know.
But, anyway, I had gotten into Rutgers, and I was like, well, the last thing I want to do is go to Rutgers, because everyone that I knew in high school was going to be at Rutgers. This is just going to be like an extension of high school. And I wanted to, and actually, I talk about this in my book. I wanted to kind of, figure out who I really wanted to be as an adult, right? And so going to a school where you don't know anybody, it's really easy to kind of say, well, like, what do I like about myself? What do I not like about myself? And let me do more of that and less of that, right? And so, Duke was great for that. I thought it was going to be, for lack of a better term, a very whitewashed university. I thought there was going to be very little diversity. And don't get me wrong, it's not the most diverse campus I've ever been to, but it wasn't as bad as I thought
Not
it
bad.
was. No, and actually there was a lot of Latinos at school. And I have a really funny story about that, because I was approached by the Latino Student Association, right? And they're like, welcome to school, you got to come join us. We got to look out for each other. We have to make sure that no one's going to blah, 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 whatever. And this is like 3 months in. And I was like, dude, everyone's been nothing but nice to me. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is isolate myself.
Right, yeah.
So I actually ended up with a really diverse group of friends back then.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I guess college universities, they're pretty liberal, right? In general.
Yeah.
Well, I went to University of Arizona. Producer Eric and I both went to University of Arizona. And, Arizona was conservative, but the campus and the college and the professors weren't conservative,
Right.
I guess that's just how universities are in general.
Yeah,
but
I think as
that's
I've gotten,
good to hear, though.
No, as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that, especially when you're a few years out of school, right? Like you mentioned, Duke is a bougie school, and that's for sure. And you come out of school, you wave that flag real proud.
Yeah.
Right? I went to Duke. That first job you get,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, because I went to Duke.
Yeah.
First thing on the resume, boom, right?
Yeah.
And then you come to realize a couple of things as you get older. One, that degree serves you one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to get your first job out of college. Right? After that, they're looking at your performance at your last job, not where you went to school. I mean, that might be a deciding factor if it's a tie between you and somebody else.
Or
right?
like if you wanted to go get an MBA or
Right,
something like that.
exactly. But also, like, I've come to realize that, had I gone to Rutgers, I could have gotten the same quality of education, right? Because it really is what you make of it as a student.
Sure.
If you find the right professors, you do whatever you need to do to get into the right classes. But what I got out of going to a bougie school was a network of people that,
And it worked for you.
it absolutely has
So you
worked.
come out of school, and what's the first job?
I went to work for a company in New York called Sapient. And they were one of the first kind of big multinational web development consulting firms. And it was great, man. It was huge. I think at the time we were 1,800 people.
And you had a computer science degree at this point?
Yep.
Or that's what you...
Yep.
Yeah.
Computer science and visual design.
Got it. And visual
Because again, I knew I wanted to not do traditional computer science stuff. I wanted
And
to
on
do
which
web
side
stuff.
of that range are you more on the UX UI side, or are you more on a back end sort of side?
You know, it's funny. When I graduated, I came out all gung ho that I could do both equally well.
Right.
And then I started working with real designers.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, no,
I'm not a
I'm much
designer.
more of a computer science guy.
Well,
than I
that's
am.
cool. I mean,
Yeah.
the quote unquote full stack developer is like
Yeah.
this unicorn thing, right?
Well,
Like,
I mean, it's easy.
they exist, but they get paid a lot, and anyway.
But also, like, the world we live in now is very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago, right? Like 15 years ago, you'd have someone who was a DBA, who was a database administrator,
Right.
because it was a very specific skill set you needed to have to learn how to stand up and run and design and optimize databases.
Yeah.
Now everyone just throws everything in Mongo and it's fine, right? Like, you don't need to be good at it.
Yeah.
The systems have gotten so good and so efficient that you can be pretty, middle of the road on most technologies and be effective. Right. The problem comes when, okay, well, I can be effective at a company that gets 100 visitors a month. I can be effective at a company that gets 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. You start getting into the 1 million, 2 million, and you start running into big scale problems. That's when having like really specific knowledge about specific technologies
I see.
comes in handy. And you
I
absolutely need to do that.
I see.
Yeah. So for the most part, I can, stand anything up, front end, back end, all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff.
That was a great description, man.
Oh, thanks.
That was good.
Yeah.
I've been around a lot of tech people. I spent my whole 20s in San Francisco operating, investing in tech companies. So that's part of my background too. I don't miss it, but it made me very smart. I have to say that.
It also, I think it makes it easier to understand a lot of conversations that are happening in our world these days, right?
Fuck yeah.
And, I like, I want to say thanks for pointing out that it was a good description. That's actually something that I've been told many times. My chief revenue officer at Baker, her name was Carter Davidson. She's still to this day one of the best salespeople I've ever met, and just a really great person to work with. And she would constantly say that. She's like, I'm not a tech person, but you do a really good job of helping non-tech people understand technical concepts.
Yeah.
And I think that's really an important skill for a CTO or a CIO to have, because so many of them just want to kind of speak at you and have you just go glaze over and not understand what you're talking about.
Well, part by design and part by luck, I spent most of my 20s in little tech companies.
Okay.
Not big tech companies. I didn't ever want to work in a corporation. My goal was always to be as close to the founders as possible and try to learn. That was the goal. I didn't have a lot of debt and everything. I was very fortunate that I could do that.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
could sort of scrape by and try to learn that kind of stuff. And thankfully, like, I just had a lot of people that were so friendly and would like smoke weed and explain things to me,
Yeah.
And I mean, people at OnFleet that I worked in a long time, you probably know what OnFleet is.
We integrated with OnFleet at Baker.
Yeah,
I know them well. Great product.
I spent like almost 3 years working at OnFleet.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I was like number 6 or something like that.
Wow. I love the technology there. Yeah.
Fantastic guys. But no, like for real, like David, Mikkel, Holland, Andrew, these people, they explain these things to me. Before that too, I had other people that, but like we spent a lot of time, and I'm thankful for that, even though I don't even do that much technology stuff anymore. So speaking of Baker, tell me about this. I mean, it's interesting because it's a name so many people know.
Yeah.
But I feel like so few people actually know what happened there.
Right. No, absolutely.
So in the best way you can, what happened there?
Right. All right. So I'll run you through the quick
and dirty. And then we're going to get into some hot topics.
Great.
So,
Sounds good. So we started Baker, David, Joel, and I. We were in New York City. And David and Joel were working together on a startup at the time. And I had my own startup with another partner. And we were both in what I like to refer to as zombie startup mode, right? It's this point where I'm sure you're familiar with it, where you've raised some capital, you've got some traction, but you don't have enough capital left to really throw fuel on the fire, and you don't have enough traction to go out and get a ton more money to throw fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
So you're basically got the countdown clock going on the wall to when do we run out of money, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
I
had this conversation with a startup this morning.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's a rough place to be,
And they're
man.
pulling their hair out.
Yeah, it's a rough place to be, because at some point, start as a small tangent, right? A conversation I've had a lot recently is there's a unique skill set you have to have as a startup founder to be able to first and foremost fall completely and totally head over heels in love with an idea, so much so that you're putting it above everything else in your life, right? Your personal life, your health to a certain extent, right? Forget having hobbies, right? This is what you do all the time. But then you also need to be able to be very objective and identify the exact moment at which point it's not going to work, and then divest yourself from it completely. And
emotionally.
Just from one day to the next. And that is really
so hard.
really difficult.
Oh
right?
my God.
Yeah, you spend so much time putting everything you can in, but anything beyond that, it's diminishing returns. And you're just like, nope, got to pick up and go. Right. And so we were kind of in that phase, and this was 2014. We were seeing all this imagery from Colorado. I'm sure you guys remember this, the media shots of the lines of people wrapped around the block, right? And we're looking at this, and we're sitting in New York, and we're ordering Grubhub and Postmates and whatever. I don't think Postmates was around then, but this food delivery service. And we just kind of had this moment of like, why can't someone do this for the cannabis industry? We had done a little bit of research and understood that 2 out of 10 consumers in cannabis dispensaries spend 80% of the revenue, right? So we're looking at these lines of people.
20%
spends 80%.
80%.
Yeah. And
I've heard that before too.
Yep,
Yeah. Same number.
Yep. Habitual user, right?
Yeah.
There's a person who's standing in line with $300-400 in their pocket.
Yeah.
They're going to buy an ounce. They're going to buy as much as they can.
This is the Flower Co. customer.
And this exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't want to talk to a bud tender.
Yeah.
They know exactly what they want,
Yeah.
right? If you don't have this one strain, fine, I'll take this other strain. I'll take my daytime weed, my nighttime weed, whatever it is. They don't need any help, right? But they're being made to wait in line behind all these tourists from Wyoming who are going to smell 14 jars of bud and walk out maybe buying a joint or two.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was the
They're
very
going to spend $20.
exactly.
Yeah.
And we said, how do we solve that problem? How do we get that guy with $400 in his pocket through this line quicker? So it's a better experience for him or her. It's a better experience for the dispensary. Everyone's happy. And we said, well, we can just apply what we know from these delivery markets in New York. And so we set up to create a online ordering platform, which is the first thing that we did. Ease was already here in California. We decided to go after other markets. I can understand now why they weren't spreading any more than they were. We're like, well, ease is kind of competition. What's going to happen if they decide they're going to come into Colorado? But they wouldn't, because Colorado wasn't doing delivery, right? So, we're doing order ahead, place an order online, get to the express line, pick up your stuff, pay. And that worked. That was a kind of foot in the door. Realized once we got to Denver, we had to open up operations in Denver, because people in Colorado were like, why are we going to give money to a New York company? We're not going to work with you. We legalize this here.
Yeah.
Made a lot of sense. Picked up, moved to Denver and set up shop there. And then we realized that there was a dispensary opening up on every other corner. And we saw that the long lines, and that wasn't going to be an issue for very long. So what's next, right? What's the next issue? And we realized that with every new dispensary that opened up, they were all doing new customer specials. They were all doing,
discounts.
It was a race to the bottom on pricing.
Yep.
And we knew that was not going to do
That was
well.
a great day for consumers.
It was a great day for
then.
the cannabis consumer.
Oh, man.
Absolutely. But for the businesses that we were trying to support, these were the guys paying our bills. We're like, well, how do we help you guys? It's like, okay, well, customer retention became our new focus. How do we get people to stay with you despite the fact that it might be a little cheaper for a short period of time down the road? And so we came up with the industry's first digital loyalty program. So you started accumulating points, whether in store or online, and then you could cash those in for free stuff, whatever. And I've come to realize that there's few things that people love to get for free more than weed.
Yeah.
Like, free weed is just a great indicator. It's a great, incentive for people to.
So
to
every
continue
time
shopping.
I go to the dispensary, I go to a place called Green Goddess
I
here.
know it well.
They use Trees, but
Yeah, they do.
anyway, Trees is a great company too.
Yeah.
But every time I go in there, I always have like, I don't know, $2 or $3 worth of credit.
Exactly.
And like, that's not that significant on my $80, $90 purchase.
Right.
But like, still feels good.
Right. Yeah, of course, you love getting that discount,
Yeah.
right? And then we realized that once we started to spread with that we were accumulating a ton of data around consumer habits, what they're buying, how much they're spending. Are they edible people? Are they flower people? Are they vape people? And also, you take that and compound it by the fact that the industry has so few ways to market to consumers. You can't use Facebook. You can't use Google Ads. You can't use Instagram, really, And we said, well, we can fix this problem for them again. We can create a targeted marketing tool set. And so that was really the big aha moment that we had, where we started selling tools to dispensaries to say, hey, we're just going to take all the data from your consumers, from your point of sale, from your loyalty program. We're going to munge it all up together, and we're going to start providing you insights to say, you should start sending text messages about edibles, or to this group, you should start sending messages about vapes, etc. And it worked really, really well to drive people back into the store. And so we started seeing some pretty astronomical growth. We got into, I think, over 1,000 dispensaries in North America, so Canada and the U.S.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
In what period of time?
I mean, we started the company officially January 1st, 2015. It was after 6 months of proof of concept and all that. And these numbers are late 2018. So 3.5 years.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we were the only game in town for a long time.
And they're each paying you an average. What's the ACV?
I mean, each is paying us on average, let's call it $2,400 a year, right? So pretty
Not that high, but
not that high.
Not low either.
Right. I mean, there was both ends, right? Just like
Yeah.
any SaaS strategy.
Yeah.
You have the multi-tiered price point.
Should I ask about the median? Would that be a better indicator?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had the number off the top of my head.
I'm just kidding. So it starts going really well.
So it's going really well.
Right. And at what point does Tilt come knocking?
Right. So that, again, is about 2018. Right?
Okay.
And we had raised...
You had posted huge revenue numbers.
Yeah.
You had raised money from... They've all been on this show. But yeah. All the investors.
Poseidon and all those other guys.
Yeah.
And, we'd raised $11.5 million privately at that
Good
point.
chunk of money.
At that point, when you're talking about mid-2018...
Not at that point. At any point.
at any
that's
point.
a good chunk of money.
That's a good chunk of money. We had, a 10,000 square foot office in Denver. We had 70-something employees.
Yeah.
We were in a good place. But, the money... This was right when the money was starting to dry up, right? This was right when... Everyone was like, well, if I'm going to write a $10 million check, it better be a damn good reason for why I'm writing it.
Yeah.
And so we knew that raising private capital at that point, after raising an $8 million Series A, I mean, how all this stuff goes, right? For optics and for, perceived growth numbers.
It's got to be higher.
It's got to be higher, right? It's got to be a 12, 13 million at least to make people comfortable with the story of what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So much of this, and I don't know what your average listener is, but so much of this money raising and everything in tech is so much about the story that
It's
you can
narrative.
tell.
It's all
narrative, right? And so for the story to work, we'd have to raise 13 million. Now, we thought about that, and my poor co-founder Joel, like it seems like from day one, all he did was ever go out and raise money.
Yeah.
That's what you do as a CEO, right? You go out, you raise money, and then David and I would take that money and we turned it into product. And then we started saying we're gonna have a real hard time raising this 13 million. Not to mention that we had unfortunately been victims of our own success to a certain extent, because as I mentioned, we were working with over 1,000 dispensaries at this point. That was like 36% of the market. That's an incredible amount of market share.
Yeah.
And it's not because we didn't try to go after the other 60 whatever percent, right? But we knew that other 60 whatever percent had their own issues stemming from a lack of capital in the market that was going to make it hard for them to come on as clients. So we knew that our, month over month sales numbers were going to start to flatten out, and potentially even, start to slow down, just as a result of what was going on in the market. But trying to raise $13 million on slowing sales numbers was like, whoa, that's going to be way harder than anything else. And at the time,
And did you have conversations with like more traditional technology investors, like Sand Hill Road? Was that part of the conversation or no?
Yes and no, right? And when we raised our A, we had conversations with those kinds of VC firms. And then we very quickly came to realize that none of them had any intention of investing, and they were just window shopping.
Got it.
Because of the fact that they all generally have LP agreements that have no vice clauses in them.
Right.
Which means they cannot invest in gambling, they can't invest in porn, they can't invest in cannabis.
But you as a software,
Yes.
they viewed it the same way.
They still viewed it the same way because of the fact that we worked in the cannabis industry, exclusively for the cannabis industry.
Well, then that vice clause is a lot bigger than it's written.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, but it's also not just that, right? It's about perception.
Yeah.
As well, right? Like Sand Hill, everyone on Sand Hill Road was talking to cannabis companies eventually to be prepared. I think DCM is probably the only company that was an exception. They invested in Ease. And then eventually Tiger Global came in, and but this was kind of at that time moving forward, we were in this weird gap.
There were others that were writing checks. I mean, there certainly were cannabis companies in Y Combinator at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we went through 500 startups.
Yeah.
Right, but we had gone through in 2015. Right. So we were much further down the line again.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. Interesting. Interesting that's how it worked out. I wonder how much of that was the balance of being in Denver. How much does that cut both ways? Look, I'm sure you guys came out here a lot, but interesting. Yeah.
True. I mean, but if you look at who else was who was raising money at that time, I'd have to go through and look at the historical investments during mid 2018 to early 2019. I know that right around then is when, God, who was it? Was it LeafLink who raised 12? It was, FlowHub just raised 23 not long ago. But they were all like very ancillary companies, and they were all very traditional critical path companies. So point of sale or distribution logistics sort of thing. We were unfortunately always put in the ancillary category, which is like, you're a nice to have, not a must have. Like if Baker goes away, it's a sales lead channel that goes away, but it's not like if a point of sale goes away. If a point of sale goes away, it's like all hands on deck. How do we get this thing back up and running? So all that is to say that
Mission critical.
Exactly. With all that going on, and with this going public kind of becoming a very common way of getting capital in place, we started to investigate that. And so, at the end of the day, looking at the end of 2018, we had 3 other companies. We joined up, we merged, we went public in Canada on the CSE as Tilt, and then Tilt Holdings, and then we acquired, which I think 2 of the better things that we did out of that deal is we acquired Blackbird and we acquired Jupiter, Jupiter Labs. And so, and then also
Jupiter has been an amazing acquisition for Tilt.
No, absolutely. I mean, Jupiter is the cash cow.
If not for Jupiter,
absolutely.
I don't even know what your stock price would look like right now.
Can't be much worse than it is right now.
And you're all locked up and everything.
I mean, I was locked up for a huge amount of time. Yeah. For anyone out there who thinks I'm swimming in money,
that doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work the way.
Yeah.
But we have. But again, like I think the thesis was right we all agreed with the thesis, which was let's take a bunch of companies that provide ancillary services
Yes.
for the industry. Let's not focus on cultivation. Let's not focus on processing, and let's provide everything else that the industry needs: logistics and software and services, right? So Blackbird does all the B2B stuff and B2C stuff, and then Baker does the B2C stuff, and we did all those and we integrated them, and now you can provide it all as a single platform, which again I think it's picks and shovels, which is what got us to how we got there in the first place.
Yeah.
We never, everyone always assumed we wanted to be a point of sale, which I still find hilarious to this day. When I would talk to investors or other tech companies, I talked to the guys at Trees, I talked to the guys at Greenbits, and they're like, but wait, aren't you guys eventually going to try to do this? And I would laugh and be like, there's nothing that I want to do less than start a point of sale company.
Yeah, but they're just looking through the lens of all the other companies, that's exactly what they did try to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could name 5 that was their plan, right? We're going to get this little wedge, and then we're going to provide tools for the entire experience.
And we just said, hey, we'd rather be Switzerland. And I
think that was smart.
Yeah, I mean, we integrated with the top, 10 point of sale companies in this space, the ones we could at least. A lot of
it's been the headset model too, which has worked well for them.
And those guys are fantastic, right? And
some of the best.
Those really smart guys. A lot of people, what I find crazy is that a lot of people don't realize that those are the same guys who started Leafly, right? Yeah, I mean, Cy and Brian and Scott, really great guys, really humble guys, a lot of integrity, really smart, and love working with those guys any chance
just
I
like
get.
The model founders,
No, absolutely.
Like they don't feel like they're cool and accomplished, which is part of the secret sauce.
Yeah.
But when they write a book or when they do something like that, like it's going to be very good.
Yeah.
Because they have navigated this whole treacherous cannabis Wild West fuckery. There's no other way to put it, and come out way ahead.
Yeah. With the right timing too.
The right timing, the right partners, the right everything. I mean, knowing Cy, he owns a huge portion of that company still,
absolutely
crazy. Anyway, thank you so much for the background.
Of course.
I own a bunch of Tilt, like everybody else that's in the shitter.
Yep.
And so that's why I asked. Yeah. And this is supposed to be a IC News, but it's a name that so many people know, and I thought it was worth having a little extended discussion about.
Yeah, and it's funny, I've never really been a huge stock guy until this whole thing came around. All of a sudden, it's every day I'm checking what's going on. But it's really interesting to see what goes on in the market and why. For example, today we announced a partnership. I still say we. That's really hard to get over. I announced a partnership.
It is hard to get over.
Yeah. With the Blink Group, right, and to provide ISO standards for vape hardware, which I think is nothing but good news.
Yeah.
And the stock takes a hit of 9%. And I'm just trying to do the math on that. Like,
why? How did that happen?
How did that happen? Is it because? And you start going down this rabbit hole of it. All right, they're based in China. Coronavirus. People think that it's going to be too much, issue in first couple of quarters of the year, and the whole. I don't know. Like, it's crazy when you start letting yourself do that. By the way, Twitter drives me insane. When you start doing Twitter stock research,
I don't.
It's all the haters.
I don't do that.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I try pretty hard to stay away from the daily news. I more on a weekly sort of basis. Like I love 60 Minutes,
right?
Or I love sort of the editorial type stuff, the 30,000 foot view, the podcasts, whatever. Yep. But the daily headlines I find mostly to be a distraction. So I kind of try not to. But obviously, weed stuff I hear about.
Right?
How can you not? Eric reads the news. He tells me about the news. Okay, so because you are a real OG. I mean, let's just call it what it is, man. Yeah. Call it what it is. I mean, you have a baby face, but
it's true.
In this business, you're 157 years in this business.
Right. Dog years, right? That's the way this industry works.
Weed years.
Yeah.
Weed years is crazy. So you have this amazing perspective on so many issues in the cannabis industry. But let's get started with just like your book, why you wrote the book. You've been a technology nerdist, as you put it yourself, your whole life. Who said you could write a book? Why? Why?
Well, it turns out no one said I could write a book, and it was pretty hard, but it was a fun process. The point of it, actually, this timing on this question is really good. We can pick up where we left off with the whole Tilt deal, right?
Okay.
So the whole deal with Tilt goes through, and all of a sudden, I go from being a co-founder and CTO of a 70-person company to being someone who according to the higher brass, didn't matter as much of a 700% company, right?
Yeah.
So that didn't last too long.
Golden handcuffs. How long did you have to work there?
Oh, no, I didn't. I was gone.
Oh, you didn't have to?
No,
Oh,
I was
fuck
a
yeah.
couple months.
Amazing.
A couple months after that. And, you know, it's these things, you know, someone said this to me right after it all happened. And it's I think truer words have never been spoken as, you know, first comes the merge and then comes the purge, right? You go into one of these things, you have a bunch of teams that come together, and there's overlap. A lot of overlap, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, who wants to be responsible for sales? Who wants to be responsible for, you know, running the software integration piece of this game? Who wants to be responsible for whatever, right? And everyone else just kind of falls off. Yeah. The whole point of doing something like this is to optimize operations, right? You go ahead and you eliminate redundancy, you eliminate unnecessary resources, and so it's very, again, to where we started the conversation, being able to kind of shift your mindset is very difficult.
Hard to do.
It's very hard to do, but it's like, all right, we went through layoffs. Everyone's talking about these layoffs and stuff. For example, Aurora, right, just laid off 500. CEO stepped down.
Yep.
You know, MedMen laid off 40-something% of their staff.
Yep.
Beerman stepped down.
Right.
And then, you know, but I'm like, guys, we went through this in January, January, February, and the industry, like, this is not new news. Mm-hmm. I think it's only gotten to the point now where the big companies have had no choice. They've tried everything else, and they're like, well, now we got to do these big cuts. The smaller ones have been getting hit along the way.
They can't take on any more debt.
Right.
You can only have so much, you know?
Right. And not only that, but the sources of financing have dried up. And so if you were operating at a loss for a growth model, all of a sudden the money dried up from one day to the next, and you got to start chopping up appendages just to be able to stay afloat.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what people are doing. But anyway, you know, I got to this point where I'm like, wow, this is incredible. I took a company public in a big merger, and as a startup.
How old were you at that point?
I was 40 years old.
Got it.
40 years old.
So 40 years old.
Yeah.
You've had this exit.
Yep.
You're rich on paper.
Yep. It's the exit, right?
Yeah.
And that's this thing.
Yeah.
It's, you find yourself in this new club, which is this club of people who've had an exit. And even small subset of that club is the people who've done it in cannabis. Pretty
Right.
small club.
Right.
I take a look around the room, and it's pretty much old white guys, right? Like that's who's in the room who have accomplished the same amount of stuff. And hey, listen, I got nothing against old white guys. Some of my best friends are old white guys, right? But if I look back to where I grew up in northern New Jersey as the son of Costa Rican immigrants whose parents didn't even graduate high school, right? I all of a sudden I start to feel a whole lot different than most of the people that were there. And I was always the person in charge of diversity at Baker. Like, I was always the person working with the hiring manager to be like, how can we get more female engineers? How can we get more people of color? How can we get, we had...
Give some tips on that. How do you get more female engineers? How do you get more people of color?
I think the biggest tip is you got to go to where they are, right? So a lot of hiring people are like, well, if they would just walk in the door, I would hire them. Like, all right, that's not good enough. Go to Women Who Code events. Go to LGBTQ coder events. These things exist in almost every major city in the country. Go there, do your spiel, be like, hey, I'm the nerd in charge of software over here. We're looking for a more diversified group of people to work with us. We'd love for you to come and interview. It really doesn't take that much. Mm-hmm. And you'd be amazed how well that goes over. And not to mention, not that this is a priority, but it's basically free PR for you, saying like, totally. We care enough about diversity that we're going to come find you, mm-hmm. as opposed to wait for you to walk in our front door.
Yep.
Right. And, for a tech company, we were, I think at the peak, almost 40% female, mm-hmm. right. Which is unheard of.
I remember that from the Joel interview.
Yeah. It was almost unheard of. And we had women in senior leadership, again, Carter was, top level executive and she was great. So, I really always loved that, and that was something that was very important to me. Again, like we touched on this a couple times as far as diversity at school, diversity at work, and I wanted to create more opportunity for younger versions of me to have success in the cannabis industry. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I look back at, the Latin American community and the things that stand in the way. And the book was not intended to be focused on Latin Americans. It's more underrepresented groups in general. But it's, it's through my lens. And my lens is growing up as a Latin American kid in Jersey. And it's very difficult to go, like, I remember, I just somehow, somewhere along the way, learned to not let what my parents thought get in the way of me doing what I was going to do, right? I figured as long as I could come in with a good logical reasoning as to why I was going to do it, that, that was enough for me to move forward with it. And as long as I could be successful, if anything, that was motivation for me to be successful. So I could come back and be like, see, the guys, this is why I did this. But even that being the case, coming to my parents at 35, 36 years old and being like, oh yeah, so after a 15, 16 year successful, career doing high level consulting for technology, I'm starting this, what you're going to interpret as a weed company. Right. And I know that a lot of people in my position would have a really hard time doing that. There's issues
specifically because you don't have white parents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think
I agree. My parents didn't love it, but they got over it.
Yeah.
They didn't love it, but they got over it.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine. I know some very conservative, all different ethnicities, families, and it would not have gone over that well.
I mean, when you think about the last few decades in the war on drugs, and, we all at this point are familiar with the stats around, the targeting of black and brown people and the enforcement, even though all segments of society consume at the same rate, we're seeing over policing of communities,
stop and frisk,
all of that, right? And so it's pretty easy to understand why someone who is an immigrant who's already looking over their shoulder, right? Because you're like, I got a target on my back because I'm here, and a lot of people don't want me here, and so you're doing everything you can to stay on the right side of the law, to stay out of trouble, and then your kid who you sacrificed everything for, who went to a good school, and you paid a lot of money in relative to your world, a lot of money to send this kid to school, and they've been successful, and then they come back and say they want to work in the weed industry, right? This industry that you've been actively avoiding for your entire life in this country because you're worried about the fact that you got a bigger target on your back than anybody else. And for that person to come in and say, I want to do this, you're going to fight back pretty hard on most of that. And so, I feel that we're not seeing a lot of young entrepreneurs enter the space because of that. And so for me, I decided that I was going to leverage this platform that I found myself standing on. Like, it's amazing, again, going back to what you're saying, if people think you're standing on a pile of money, it's amazing how much they'll listen to you, right? And so for me, I was like, well, here's an opportunity to use this platform to do some good, to inspire some people who may have otherwise not considered entering this industry, to get them fired up about what's possible, and to hopefully get them into this industry now. Right. I think those of us who've been in the industry for a while, it does feel like it's been 100 years, but we also know that it's still, the first or second inning as far as the cannabis industry is concerned.
In fact, you could argue, this will be a gross generalization, that nothing up until now has mattered.
Absolutely. No, I mean,
I could so easily make that argument.
Yeah. And it's, it's weird as someone who has done so much in the last 5 years, but to be like, doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. That's all just a precursor to where we're at now.
Yeah.
And now moving forward is what's really important. But I also know, again, just from my experience, that having diversity at the top is the best way to create diversity throughout an organization. So again, if we look at it, as you just mentioned, then we're starting now. Let's get as many diverse groups of people in senior management positions as we can, as founders, as C-levels, as VPs, because that's just going to inspire these organizations to continue to include that diversity.
And is that happening?
I think so. I think the cannabis industry is this weird microcosm of old boys club, like you mentioned. But also, when you look at the traditional kind of grassroots part of the cannabis industry, cultivation, etc., you're not seeing a lot of diversity there either, for a lot of the same reasons we just talked about, right? So people who are coming in with a lot of the knowledge aren't a terribly diverse group. The people who are providing the finance aren't a terribly diverse group, right? So it's like those of us who have entered the space have, brought a lot of diversity to it, and I think it's really happening, especially with this shakeout that's happening right now, right? So we see everyone, like we mentioned, going through layoffs. But for me, it's especially interesting to watch the software companies, right? The MedMen has their own software team.
Yeah.
To watch Ease, to watch some of the point of sales, like they're shaking out, and the talent that's coming in is more diverse just because the tech talent that's starting to join the industry now is more diverse just because they're coming from traditional tech.
Yep.
Right. And the risk profile isn't as high as it was 5 years ago.
Well, the salaries have gotten better just for starters.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of people that, again, I was fortunate enough to do it in technology, and then I was fortunate enough to do it in cannabis, there was a long time where nobody got paid.
Oh, yeah.
And there were no sponsors on this show, and it was hard. It was
Right.
just hard. Everything was hard.
Well, and that's
you
the
know?
thing, right? I mean, people, I think I've had the conversation several times with people want all the success, but they don't want to put in the hard work and
Right.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't want to do the
Yeah.
work.
As someone who had been at a senior level technology position for the previous 5 years of my career, you know, it's not boasting to say it. It's not an exaggeration to say that my market value at the time when I started Baker, I could easily be making $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I paid myself $35,000 for the first 2 years at Baker, and I was living in Manhattan, Brooklyn when I first started this. Right. And it's, you know, and that was without any end in sight. It wasn't like, well, I'm just going to do this until we get to this point and then we're going to get more money and then I guarantee myself a salary.
Oh, that was the plan.
No, it's like, that's the plan until we have more money.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll give myself 60, right? Just to be able to live off of. I lived in my intern's closet for 5 months in Denver when I first moved there, you know? And so, yes, there's more money now, which is nice. But it's from a tech perspective, what I love is that it's bringing in more seasoned talent.
Yeah.
You know, and that seasoned talent is used to having a more diverse team in the space. So I'm hoping that's going to help drive it.
So I think you kind of answered the question. Are we doing a good enough job?
No, we're not. But, you know, and it's hard for me to say this because diversity is really important to me, but survival of the industry is more important to me, right? And right now it is an all hands on deck. Let's make sure that the best of breed survive and move forward so that we have companies left to diversify.
Totally.
Right.
Or, let's see, the alternative for me is if we don't do a good job of saving, I like the way you put it, best of breed today, then we're really in danger of what I think your biggest concern is, which is that New York, Wall Street, private equity suits come in
Yep.
and make it all homogenous and consolidate and all these things, right? I mean, so that's kind of the fight. I talk about it dramatically, but like there's a fight over the soul of cannabis right now in the cannabis industry, right? And look, not all the old school weed people are good and righteous, and not all the new school people are bad and sharks, but there's certainly enough in both camps. And look, as a journalist and as an author, it's pretty fun to watch, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's actually been the most interesting thing for me over the course of the last year. It's almost exactly a year ago that I left Baker. And I took the time to write the book. It was a lot of fun. I've been doing some advisory work. I've been consulting. I work with a group in LA here called the Fourth Movement. We're working on social equity initiatives, trying to provide licensing and financing for them.
Let's talk specifically about that. I'm glad you brought that up because I think this is where there's a lot of confusion, sort of overlap. And it's something that we probably haven't done a good enough job on this show of talking about, which is like there are all these minority equity, in some cases 1% programs in different counties. We'll just talk about California for purposes of this. And look, I think a lot of people have been largely disappointed
Absolutely.
with how they've come together. But I know that's a general statement. It depends on localities and everything, but kind of give us your 2 cents on that part in particular.
Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult, right? It's a very difficult problem to solve. And I think a lot of the problems, and I think my opinion on it can be a bit controversial and it can be a bit, you know.
Love it.
It's,
let it rip.
you know, you can't, like, a lot of people think social equity exists in a bubble outside of a capitalistic environment. And that's just not the case, right? None of this happens without money. And so you have to take both of those things into account. So, for example, Fourth Movement. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but you know,
Just from you.
yeah, just briefly, what we've done is Kareem Webb, who is the founder and CEO, has a family history of franchise work. So his father owns something like 13, I think, McDonald's in Southern California. He owns 4 Buffalo Wild Wings. He's got another few that are opening up. And years ago, they really started prioritizing opening franchises up in lower income areas, and specifically working with people from those areas, first from a human capital development point of view, and then management training, blah, 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 down the line, right? Like, let's give back to these communities that we're in. And if the people here aren't, you know, as qualified potentially as some that would be coming in from elsewhere, well, let's make it our responsibility to train those people,
Yep.
right? Teach a man to fish,
Yep.
as it were.
Yep.
And I really aligned with that. So when I found out that they were doing Fourth Movement, which the basic thesis there is pretty simple to understand if you understand what a franchise model is. It's not true franchise model, but basically you take a central back office entity, you raise a bunch of capital. You take that capital to take care of all the underlying systems, right? So I've been operating as their CTO, fractional CTO for the last 10 months or so, identifying systems, identifying integration partners, identifying logistics platforms, things like that, and then making sure that they all get integrated well.
Yep.
And knowing that it's going to be multiple stores in multiple regions, right? Not just one store, right? And then they took a bunch of the funding that they got, and they said, okay, well, all right, we're going to do all that for everything, for supply channel, for logistics, for real estate, for whatever we need. All the underlying expenses we're going to handle. We're going to run an incubator program with a group of social equity applicants, right? Because a lot of people don't realize, in order to qualify as a social equity applicant, there's this laundry list of things that you can check off. And you have to have a certain number of them to qualify. The ones that come to mind are you have to have lived in an area that was heavily impacted by the war on drugs. You had to have made under a certain amount of money for the last X number of years. You had to live in a certain zip code, for a certain number of years. Maybe you went to prison for a low-level nonviolent drug crime. Like all these things add up, and they say, yes, you qualify as a social equity applicant. That's just step one. That means you qualified, right? That doesn't mean you're going to be any good at running a business, right? And if you look at then the requirements...
In fact, it may mean that specifically you're not.
Exactly.
Just by the disadvantages we outlined.
That's exactly what I was going to say, especially because then you take that and you throw it up against the list of requirements to open a dispensary, period.
Right.
You have to have the real estate acquired. You have to have a business plan. You have to have a security plan. You have to have all these things that are, basically adds up to millions of dollars. The Venn diagram of those two groups has a very small intersection, right? And so identifying this, what Kareem and Fourth Movement did was saying, okay, we know that this is the case. We know that these the individuals in this group need help. And the city initially
don't have these skills.
Right. And the city had promised that was going to be part of the program. They were going to train these individuals, and of course they underfunded it, and it never came through, and the training never happened, right? So Fourth Movement says, we'll handle it. So we run a group of people, I think it was a little over 100 people, through an incubator program over the course of, I want to say 6 months, but this all started before I joined the company.
It's a company or a nonprofit?
It's a company.
It's a company.
No, it is a for-profit company.
Totally company.
It is a company.
Got it.
It is.
I like that.
I like to refer to what we're doing at Fourth Movement as conscious capitalism.
So just so I understand the deal, I like that phrase, by the way. And think about this. After this, I'm going to ask you how I can get involved, how I can help. But so they come to you, or you find them? Where do the leads come from?
Community outreach.
Okay.
Right. Reaching into the community and saying, again, because Kareem had such a pre-existing network of people within these communities, he could just go out to his network and say, we're doing this. Who's interested in doing it? And so then people identified as, I want to be a part of this industry.
Okay.
And then they sacrificed over the course of 6 months or whatever, going to these trainings, basically proving who is the most qualified, right? And that's the part that is really, it's kind of touchy. People don't like talking about that. People don't like looking at a group of people and saying, well, one person is more qualified and therefore most likely to be successful in this group of people. No one likes that. Everyone's like, well, we all have an equal chance. It's like, yes, you all have an equal chance, but there's limited resources. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to identify those who have the best chance. And if those people are more successful, they are going to then create more opportunity for the rest of the people in this group. Right. And so at the end of the incubator program, the intention was, and this has been written about in the LA Times, like people are up in arms about the fact that we scored 13 licenses out of the 100 that were given out. And people are like, well, how is it possible that you got so many of them? It's like, well, we were organized. And we had capital, right?
Totally.
So we invested heavily in getting the real estate, in finding the right applicants. I mean, I was personally setting up computers in a data lab on a T1 line to be able, and training. We trained paralegals to enter data. Be like, you have this applicant, you type faster than they do. We know, everyone knows that the first come, first serve application process was ridiculous. But what can you do, right? You can either complain about it or you can try to be the most competitive in that environment. And so we said, if we have to train a group of people to enter data as fast as possible, I spend weeks optimizing PDF files to try to get them as small as possible, still containing all the data so that it would upload faster than anyone else's, right? But if you look at what Fourth Movement had to do, they had to come reach out to me. They had to hire me. They had to pay me to do all this stuff. They had to pay all these other people, right? And this is all in support of this, of the social equity applicants that we had invested in. And so it comes down to the same thing. Like there's social equity, but then you need capital and investment and network and a support group to help you get there.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
It's
And
very
so
cool.
we're hoping that we get these people up and running. Oh, and I mean, the best part is
So when was that class? When was the class that you said went through?
that happened the first half of 2018.
Okay.
2019.
Okay.
And then the application process was in September.
Okay.
And like I said, we scored 13 licenses.
Yeah.
And so now the top 13 performers in that group are being gifted 81% ownership of a dispensary.
Wow.
Right. So that's the benefit that you get from.
So that's the deal.
Yeah.
You go through the incubator.
Yeah.
If you get a license, you guys take 19% for the support. And
Everything. Yeah.
Everything. You
Yeah.
do the taxes. You do
everything.
So no
We run the
280E.
finances.
What about like at the operational level, like inventory and
We're centralizing all of that.
Got it.
We're
Wow.
Yeah, we're centralizing all of it.
That's really cool.
So what you have to do is manage your store.
This is like what MedMen should have done.
I agree. Yeah.
Med people, as Joyce of Big Rock would say.
People, that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so that, and what was really upsetting about all this is, it's when everyone's fighting to get something they want, they're fighting as a community. When one person doesn't get what they wanted, then it's them against the world.
Yeah.
Right. And it's been really frustrating to watch that go down to where, like, at the beginning, we were all in this together. We're trying to do as much as possible for social equity applicants. And then unfortunately, and listen, it is very unfortunate. There's a lot of people. And again, this is the game, which is LA saying you have to have the property, you have to have this, which is crazy to think that these, people who fall under the qualifications we talked about briefly, right, have to go and acquire real estate that is going to be rented at astrological rates because the owners know that it's zoned properly for cannabis regulations. Not that hard to figure out when all of a sudden you got 6 people coming to you in the course of a week looking for a dispensary location.
Yeah.
That means you can start charging a whole hell of a lot more. And, I don't want to say it's predatory, but they get it right up to the limit of how much they can charge. And they create and also not to mention, because of the fact that you don't even know if you're going to get a license, you have to have all these opt-out clauses in the lease, which then drives the lease that much higher, right? So you're exposed to so much expenditure before you even know if you have a license. And so I understand why people are mad. I get it. But it's like, who do you blame in the situation?
Well, as long as we're assigning blame, that's one of the things I like to do on this show. Lori Ajax, I'd love to have in this seat.
I would love to have a
A
conversation.
lot of questions
with
that I would like to
Yeah.
ask Lori Ajax. But what I was going to say is one of the reasons that getting a license is so outrageous and the effort put into it is so outrageous is because the black market is eating legal cannabis alive. I don't know the exact percentage. Data in cannabis tends to be a little hazy, as you know, but somewhere in the 60% range of cannabis sold in California is black market.
Yeah.
And look, I get it. Weed is expensive. You go to the store. I have money. I still think it's expensive.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you got your cousin, your dude of whatever years, however many years, they come to your door. They bring you the same stuff that probably is in the dispensary anyway. That happens to me constantly when people are like, oh, here, try this weed. And I'm like, what is this? I'm like, oh, it's the same shit that's in the goddamn green
it's the
goddess.
gelato. It's the whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't say Sherbinski on it,
Right.
but it is.
Yeah.
And so there's a question coming here. Okay. I promise.
Looking forward to it.
I understand why that's such a tough decision for people, but it's not scalable. We can't continue, right?
Right.
What do we do about the black market? Is it okay to smoke black market weed? Should we be shaming these people like they're smoking cigarettes? Like, what do we do?
I know, and this is
like that was a really long question.
No, I like it though.
But we got
like
there.
It. Yeah, and one of the things that I stopped calling it the black market a little while ago.
Okay.
I talk about this in my book a bit. It's just kind of this unconscious racism, right? Like, why is everything that's black bad, right? I just refer to it as the illicit market.
Yeah.
Right.
Illicit.
A lot of people refer to it as a traditional market.
Traditional.
Which,
Duty free.
Duty
I've
free
heard as well.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
And you look at it, and no, it's a very difficult issue, right? And I think the problem starts with the taxation. Why are the taxes so high? And why is it that the BCC and the DCR are complaining about no funds? I'm like, well, if we know how much money is being made.
Where's it going?
Where is it going? Right? As we mentioned earlier, there was supposed to be training for the social equity applicants. There was supposed to be budget earmarked for that. It never happened. Where does that money go? Right? And then how do you have the gall to raise taxes at the beginning of this year? Right? So is it that what a lot of people are saying is that they're taking the tax benefits from this industry and putting it towards other issues? I mean, we all know that California is in a deficit and has been for a long time, and there's a lot of money a lot of places where that money could be disappearing, right? But you can't have it both ways. You can't tax the hell out of the market and then complain about the illicit market surviving.
Yeah.
I mean, studies show that people are willing to spend more money on an altruistic alternative, right? Like you and I had a guy here in California for years. He would come to my house. Sure, his selection wasn't as great as it could have been, but I knew I could call him and I could get stuff delivered to my house, and it was very reasonably priced.
So I had a guy that was fantastic and brought me everything all the time, and it was better than
I got that when I was in New York. I was in Brooklyn. I had the best service ever. You ever watch that show High Maintenance?
Yeah.
I basically had one of those guys, right? And they would just show up.
Oh, New York is notorious
super
for
friendly.
those, yeah.
I mean, everything was packaged beautifully, like ready for the legal market.
It was expensive though?
No, I mean, it was not compared to what we're paying now in the legal market here.
Like what was a fire eighth in Manhattan in
This is 2014.
2014 cost? Yeah.
Top of the line, 55, 60.
Okay.
I mean, so like not
And obviously there's no tax.
no tax, right?
Yeah.
That's out the door, right?
It's basically the same price without the
Yeah, and they
tax,
would always
yeah.
throw in like a cookie or a bag of keef or something. Just kind of there'd always be that kind of call me back next time sort of deal, right?
Yeah.
But the convenience you couldn't beat, right? And these guys would be there, 30, 40 minutes after you called them. And I thought it was genius the way they worked around the restrictions, and that they just had a bunch of hipsters on bikes with lockable cases that they can't search. I'm like, yeah, that's beautiful. That works really well.
That's chill.
And so I think going back to the altruism thing, people want to do the right thing. People don't want to break the law, right? Don't get me wrong. There's a few counterculture individuals, a small percentage in our industry that are always going to say, I'm never going to the legal market. This is the way we've always done it, which is never a good reason to do anything, just because we've always done it this way.
Right. I hate that.
But, everyone would like to. Like, I live one block from the MedMen on Abbot Kinney. And what's been shown, we have these conversations all the time at Fourth Movement as we're starting to roll out our 64 and Hope chain. It's like, well, what's the driver, right? And I'm one of the people at the organization who has the most cannabis experience because, as you mentioned, I've been doing this for a while. And I was like, guys, I know you want to think that XYZ is going to be your differentiator, but you know what really makes a difference? Convenience. Like, is it close by? Is it a good selection?
Yeah.
Do they have consistent product?
Is the price reasonable?
Is the price reasonable?
Yeah.
Right. So I shop at MedMen mostly because it's right there. I can walk there in 5 minutes. Right. It's convenient. But
it's so
again,
expensive.
I have more money than most people. Right. And so like if it came down to me saying, I'm living check to check or close to it.
Yeah.
And I can either go to MedMen and once I slap tax on something, I walk out the door paying $80 for an eighth, or I can call my guy and that's $45 and I have a little bit more cash left in the bank. It's going to be really hard to convince me.
Or, and they don't pay me, but they should. Flower Co. is an amazing option. Honestly, it's not even a plug, but if you smoke a lot of weed, this is for you.
I've heard about these guys. I've never actually experienced them.
So they've been on the show. They're friends of ours. It's a Costco model.
Right.
So they charge you a yearly membership.
Yeah.
They sell you a little bit over wholesale. They probably have a little bit of margin in there. But it's beautiful, man. And see, the thing that it changes is obviously they have the old pals and all the big ones. But what it allows you to do is reach and like buy the highest end stuff because it's like $40.
Yeah. I mean, that's hard to beat.
It's hard to beat, man. I'm telling you.
Again, you want to do the right thing,
So
but when it's that much of a difference,
yes.
how do you justify
Yes.
it? You know,
Yes.
You're just doing the best job you can to be
So,
fiscally responsible. At that point.
Aside from Flower Co., what do we do? What do we do with these people? I mean, it's like, do you steal bread to feed your family? You know,
Right.
It's such a dilemma.
Right. I think, the industry needs, the legal side of the industry needs to grow. In order for the legal side of the industry to grow, more consumers need to leave the illicit market and come to the legal side of things. In order for people to do that, you have to incentivize them to shop legal, which means you have to drop taxes. I think a tax holiday in California is a step.
They
in one.
raised them.
I know. I think I saw
Are
that
they
happen.
crazy?
I was like, "Are you? This is the exact opposite."
So, okay.
What you have to do.
So when that happens, when I see that, that triggers this little suspicion in the back of my brain, and I wonder if you have the same thing. Is this intentional? Are they trying to make it untenable?
I think the people who are running the show are just not in touch with the cannabis
just
community
don't
at
get
large.
it.
They just don't get it. They're not the people who are watching what happens day to day, right? They're not talking to people like you and I or all of my consumers, right? At the peak, we had over 2 million people on our platform.
Yeah.
And I could see what they're buying, how
Yeah.
often they're buying, all this. They're not talking to them.
Yeah.
They're looking at budgetary numbers. They're looking at where can we bring in more revenue, and not understanding that as you go down the line, getting towards the consumer, like these small tax changes you're making are going to have huge implications on the market in general, which in turn is going to affect you negatively from a tax revenue perspective.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's easy to blame the government regulatory bodies, but they're incredibly understaffed, right? So it comes from even higher up.
Higher up, yeah.
Right?
Look, these are not simple questions.
No, they really are.
But I talk about it every week on this show. We're failing.
We are.
We're failing. And no individual is responsible, but every founder, venture capitalist, private equity guy, lawmaker, we are all failing. And the question is, what do we do about it? And nobody has a good solution, but there is one, and someone smart is going to find that solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think you also have to look at different markets, right? California is a mess. California happens to be the 5th largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Right? It's basically trying to legalize in a country.
Yeah.
Right here.
It is a country.
And then you have all these municipalities and cities who want to run things their way.
own way, yeah.
Right? What is it? 76% of California still doesn't have legalization.
Yeah.
Right? Even though the state legalized.
Yeah.
Um,
And delivery in those localities is
Right. Yeah, you don't-
supposed to be. But
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at a few really concentrated areas, right? A lot of people who live on the East Coast, for example, have no idea how red the middle of California is.
Yeah.
California is incredibly conservative
Yeah.
between Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Yep.
And so you're looking at these two areas really, and these are also two innovation hubs. You have a lot of people who are trying to come after this new industry. And so there's a lot of competition. The regulators see dollar signs. They're like, we can take advantage of this, blah, blah, blah. And they don't realize that the person that they were intended to serve at the end of the day, which is the consumer, is getting screwed.
Well, it's so surprising because I feel like it's counterintuitive to the way California lawmakers usually behave, which is very anti-business.
I just want to say that one of the last things that I think is really impacting the speed at which the illicit market is transitioning to the legal market is that these regulators, a lot of them are doing it begrudgingly. Local regulators never wanted this to pass in the first place. And so they just look at it as an opportunity to make as much money as possible, right? And so they're going to tax as high as possible. They don't care about the community, right? I think this is what it comes down to. Who actually cares about this community that we're all talking about? It's a small segment of the population.
Not a lot.
Not a lot of
Not
people.
a lot of people, because it's like, oh, wow, you have to pay more for your weed?
Right, exactly.
No small batch, only corporate cannabis? Like, who cares,
Exactly.
really,
And so until that sentiment changes, and I think the medical market, et cetera, will help a lot of that change. But also, and not to get on too much of a tangent, I warn people against, what I've come to call the medical marijuana red herring, right? Which is like leading with it's all medicine, right? It's all medicine. Like, a lot of it is medicine to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who get a lot of medical benefits, but there's also most of us who just get a therapeutic benefit, right? And we can't discount that, because if you go in headstrong to regulators saying it's about the medicine, then the minute that the rec market starts to open up, they're like, but I thought you said it was all about the medicine.
We did a huge disservice to ourselves.
Absolutely.
By saying that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Because look at it today. There is no medical market.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's just gone.
Right. Well, you look at and the other thing, right? You look at other markets that have done it better. I think objectively, Colorado did a better job. Granted, it's a state of 5.5 million people, right? So they had an easier task at hand, but they kept the medical market. They rolled out the adult use market. They made the restrictions on qualification for the medical market much higher, so that if you're actually still able to get a medical card where you're paying significantly fewer taxes, it's because you have a demonstrable need to be able to go in there, pay fewer taxes, and get the medicine that you need. And adult use people don't have to pretend that they're this medical patient. They're like, no, but I'm willing to pay more.
Yeah.
Because I want my weed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just hope that there are some brands that start to stick, because that's really what we need, right? If there are a couple, Kiva has done a good job of doing that. There's a couple others a little bit, but like mostly the brand wars are just at the beginning here.
Yeah.
This is episode 1 of the brand wars, right?
And it's really interesting.
It's very interesting,
Yeah,
especially if you don't own a brand.
Right. Well, especially coming from the traditional days. And listen, like, I love so many of the old school cultivators that I've met. I was having a conversation with Brett from Wonder Bread not long ago. And
Talk to Brett. Yeah.
Yeah, Brett's like, he's a diehard, quality cannabis above all else, right? Like, as long as I'm putting out the best flower I can, then everything's going to work out. And, it's working out really well for him. But I kind of disagree with that statement. Like, the market's going in a very different direction. It's going in the way of everything else that CPG has done, right? It's about branding. It's about demographics. It's about identifying who your target market is and catering to them, right? And so I think that's why Kiva has done such a good job. Kiva, Dosis to a certain extent. I know it's a more localized brand, but and even MedMen, right? A lot of people don't realize that MedMen were successful.
Is MedMen going to survive?
Yes. I think they're going to survive. I think it's going to be a very different incarnation from what it is today.
But the brand is strong enough that it's going to live.
Exactly, which plays exactly into what I'm talking about. They were the first ones to understand that this emerging consumer market was looking for an approachable brand.
Yeah.
And they were brand guys. Like, most people don't realize it, that those guys had an agency, I think it was called Modman, that was doing work for dispensaries. And they said, these people don't know what they're doing. We can do this better.
Yeah.
And that's how they got into MedMen.
Yeah.
And started doing that.
Yeah.
And now you look at whether it's the Kivas or the Bebos or Lord Jones or Lowell, right? Any of these companies that have spent a significant amount of money
But see,
on the brand.
even as big of companies as those are, there will be a lot of people listening to this that don't know those names.
No, absolutely.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah.
It's so easy to become, to put on the blinders in our industry,
Yeah.
right? And just like not think about people outside.
Yeah.
But I love talking to family for that. Like, I'll talk to family back home and say, hey, do you guys know about this? And almost always it's no.
Yeah.
But they're always really excited to learn about it.
Oh, you mean you don't read New Cannabis Ventures
Right.
every day?
Exactly.
Shout out to Alan.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit. I love to know about the person behind the work. You obviously do some very important work. What kind of consumer are you? At the end of the day, obviously you don't get high all day. I can see that. But at the end of the day, are you a daily consumer, first of all?
Yeah, I would say so.
And what are you into? Flowers, concentrates?
I was on another podcast recently, and they talk about, your first experience and then your preferred experience.
Okay.
Right?
That's cool.
And so my first experience was, as so many of us, I was like in high school and I was trying to impress a girl. So like, she was smoking weed and I was like, yeah, I'll hit some of that too. Right. And, I can talk about that for a long time, just about what went through my head that first time I smoked weed.
What did go through your head?
It was mostly, everyone expects it's going to be this like, monumentous I'm high thing, but
It's very subtle.
Yeah. And I was like, I've been lied to.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that went through my head.
I've been bamboozled.
Yeah.
That's how I felt.
I was like, I grew up in the Nancy Reagan say no era, right?
Yeah.
Just your brain on drugs
Yeah.
in a frying pan situation.
Yeah.
And when I finally smoked weed, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? This is what all the hubbub is about? And so that's when I think I immediately became an advocate for it, because I was like, well, if they're lying to me about this, what else are they lying to me about? Right. And so like that really kind of sparked me up. But I didn't really start smoking.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. That was probably like my senior year of high school. And then I went to school and I had a few kids, mostly from California, who always had good bud, and we'd get together and smoke occasionally. But I did a semester abroad when I was in college, and I went to Australia. I was living in Sydney, and I ended up rooming with an Irishman, Jerome Joyce. I'll never forget Jerome. And we had a good time. We had so much fun together. But he smoked weed. But being Irish, he would always smoke spliffs.
Yeah.
Right. And for me,
Like 80% tobacco.
yeah, 80% tobacco. And like for him, what historically would have been hash or flour, if you can find it, right?
Yeah.
And so I started smoking spliffs, and I smoked tobacco at the time. I smoked from like 18 to 36. Thank God I stopped doing that.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But during that whole period of time, a spliff was by far my preferred, and it was the ritual of it too, right? As you mentioned, I don't tend to smoke during the day. Like, I'm not a person who functions better when I'm stoned. But I've got a hand steering the wheel going in my head all the time. So when I get home at the end of the night,
Slow it down,
I
yeah.
want to slow it down. I want to shut it off. I want to put something stupid on television and laugh without worrying about what do I have to do
And
tomorrow.
do you achieve that?
I do. Absolutely.
Good for you,
And
man.
it takes the edge off. You know, I can feel my shoulders drop. You
Yeah.
get a little stoned.
Good for
So
you.
like I appreciate that. But then I quit smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I can't keep smoking spliffs. If I keep smoking
Right,
spliffs,
yeah.
I'm going to go back.
addicted, yeah.
Right. So I kind of took a little break, and I would smoke flower occasionally. But then as the market matured, I was introduced to vape pens. And I was like, this is perfect.
It was for you.
This
yeah.
is for me. It's much easier to dose.
Yeah.
It doesn't last as long. The effect doesn't last as long, so I can titrate better.
Yeah.
I don't wake up like I'm one of those people who can get a weed hangover. You know, like you
Really?
wake up the next
Yeah.
day and you're just not 100% there. And I don't like that, especially when you're running a business. Like that's just not.
And what happens like if you have a cup of coffee?
It'll help.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it'll
helps,
definitely
yeah.
take the edge off of that.
yeah.
But if I can hit a vape pen all night and wake up the next morning
good.
clear as day.
But not like a dab.
No.
yeah.
I've only done a couple of dabs in my life, and I'll leave that to the professionals.
Got it.
I can't say that I have a huge tolerance. I have more tolerance than most beginners.
Yeah.
But not as much, not nearly as much of a
You're
tolerance.
an average regular user.
Yeah, I'm an average Joe user.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that's the thing.
Or
about
an average Jose. Is that a bad joke? Or?
I'll take it.
Excuse me.
No, but we were talking about brands, and I love that, you know, this market is introducing all this product differentiation, right? Like, I love trying new edibles, and I'll try different vape pens, and I'll try.
You like to experiment.
Yeah,
That's cool.
One of my favorite products is actually out of Colorado, and again, I'm not getting paid to endorse them, but it's called Stillwater,
Yeah.
and they were the first water soluble powder that I encountered.
Yeah.
So you buy this little container. It's like a pack, like little packets of sugar in a container, and you can either sprinkle it on food or you can pour it in a drink.
Yeah.
And like the other thing I like to do, take the edge off, is I like drinking whiskey, and I'll have like a glass or two of whiskey at the end of the night.
I'm an old fashioned guy.
No, I love old fashions, but at one point I just started drinking straight whiskey, and you can ask my wife about this. At one point I started pouring Stillwater into the whiskeys, and I dubbed the drink a Cloudy Day in Kentucky because it makes it like a cloudy color.
Okay, all right.
And it's like, so I'm getting my whiskey and I'm getting my weed at the same time.
Wow.
That's a nice
That's
kind of
efficient.
take the edge off at the end of the day.
Does your wife like weed?
She does. Yeah. She's not nearly as much of a consumer. She grew up in Minnesota. And so, you know, she had even less exposure, because I think me growing up in New Jersey, especially urban New Jersey, it was always around.
You're close to New York. too.
Yeah, you're close to New York. It's always around. You always knew friends who had blunts.
Yeah.
For her, Midwest, you know, not as much.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. How can our audience help you?
Oh man, it's been a pleasure. It's actually, you know, so fun to talk about all this stuff. Right now, I'm doing everything I can to, you know, to help raise awareness for the book. Again, the book's called The Highest Common Denominator. It's available on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
Yeah, you can find it on my website as well.
How long is it? Is it really long?
It's 290
I apologize.
pages.
I haven't read it.
I know. It's
Yeah.
290 pages.
Yeah.
And we're working on getting an audiobook out because
Okay. Are you going to read it?
I think I am.
Cool.
Yeah, I actually
fun.
had a buddy of mine who lives here in LA, because I've lived here on and off for about 15 years, and I have a buddy of mine who does voiceovers, and he's got a really good voice. And I was going to approach him I was like, I want you to read my book.
Cool.
And he's like, I could do that, but one, it's going to be, it's going to take a while. It'll be really expensive. He's like, and at the end of the day, they don't want to hear me. They want to hear you.
I think so. You have plenty good enough voice. You could do it.
But no one likes to hear their own voice. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you do.
I've gotten over it.
Yeah.
I used to, I felt weird about it, and then, meh.
Yeah.
It just kind of happened.
I have to also, I need to see if I can get everyone who contributed, because there's about 6 or 7 different asides in the book. So I interview some people in the industry that only industry people know, and other people. So, Marv Washington, Ricky Williams, Tiki Barber, Emily Paxia,
Sick.
Rico Tarver, Dave Tran. These guys all contributed their stories about diversity and inclusion in the space to the book. So I'm hoping to see if I can line them up to read their portions as well. But you can find it on rogerobando.com as well. That's ROGEROBANDO.com. And you can find all the necessary, events that I'm doing. I'm going to be at South by Southwest. Ricky and I are actually speaking on a panel together about social justice initiatives, about creating more access to our communities. To be a part of it.
Do you know the show Jesus and Miro?
I do.
Okay, so you know how they do the neon sign? Like if you had a neon sign above your bodega for the rest of your life.
Right.
What would your I stole this from them.
Right.
But I love it. So what would your neon sign say?
The first thing that came to mind, it would say relax.
Oh, I fucking love that.
Yeah. I think
It's been
everyone
so
needs to
fun.
relax. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming.
It's been a
man.
pleasure.
It's been
Thank
a
you
good
guys.
time.
Look forward to doing it again someday. Thank you.
Good stuff, man.
Thank you.